introducing yourselves, and please continue to do so. And we will be using Mentimeter again. Just a reminder, if you want to use a second device. So welcome everyone to the UCT Pesticide Discussion Forum, which is supported by the Swedish Chemicals Agency, Chemi. And as you know, in these forums, we are not a webinar. We try to simulate a discussion. So we look forward to everyone chatting on today's important topic in relation to gender and pesticides. I think most of you have found the chat room, which is great. Remember that this is a non-partisan group, that we may not agree with everyone, but we respect each other's viewpoints, and really we want to hear from all of you. So shortly I'm going to introduce our presenter for today, and she is going to take us through an introduction and then 3 questions which we will discuss in the chat room. And also there will be poll questions, as I mentioned, in Mentimeter. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Sara Rengam, who is the Executive Director of the Pesticide Action Network Asia and the Pacific, which is a regional network working towards the elimination of the hazards of pesticides and the promotion of agroecology. It's committed to advancing food sovereignty, gender justice, and environmental sustainability. Sara has 30 years of experience undertaking research and providing training at the national, regional, and international levels on community pesticide action monitoring and on the monitoring of the use of pesticides in the Asian Pacific region. She's also chair of IBON and Advocacy International Foundation, and founder and steering committee member of the Asian Rural Women's Coalition. Sara, it's very nice. It's a pleasure to have you, and thanks for taking the time. We look forward for you leading us through this important topic. Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrea. So it's a very interesting and for me an important area of focus for Pan Asia Pacific, because just to give a background, we started working on women and pesticides a long time back. And one of the things that we realized when we were starting to work with local groups, mainly women's groups in the rural areas, that they were not aware of the impact of pesticides on women. And so we did a series of surveys to find out what's happening on the ground. This was late 90s, and it was quite shocking because they said that, throughout Asia, whether it's South Asia or Southeast Asia and East Asia, women were using pesticides, but nobody was talking about the issue, and nobody was like, not only not talking, they were also like, they were not aware that women were spraying pesticides as workers and as farmers and, as indigenous peoples community. So it was quite interesting that this invisibility was there. And although now things have changed, they have not changed so drastically that we can say that there is no gender discrimination. And so the topic today is very close to what I've been looking at, and quite shocking actually, to be very frank. So so I just wanted to start by saying that sex is biologically determined. So it's, male, female. But what gender is that it's societal and socially constructed characteristics. So this includes norms and behaviors and roles. And this is coming from WHO, where it's very clear that the relationship between man, women, girl or boy it's really a lot of it is socially constructed. So and it's hierarchical and produces inequality. So gender is not, you know, um, uh, because it's just socially constructed, it's produces inequalities, and it intersects with other social and economic inequalities. And what is also clear is that the factors of gender-based discrimination intersects with ethnicity, with socioeconomic status, disability, age, geographic location, um, gender identity, sexual orientation, among others. And this is also in terms of, in Asia, we see a lot of gender discrimination, and this is interlinked with class, caste, and ethnicity. So it's not on its own. So just just to show that this is really very much something that we can all work on, and to remove this inequalities quite easily if there is for a kind of political and economic and social change that we need to all be aware and be part of the change, so that we have women and men being equal in all sense. So I think that's quite important aspect. Next slide, please. So in the agricultural sector, the most marginalized, as I mentioned, in Asia are the small food producers. And these are the women and men, smallholder farmers, indigenous peoples, and agricultural workers, because they are the food producers. And yet, ironically, during the COVID-19 pandemic, you find that they are the most affected and the most hungry and I'm seeing that in Asia and also in all the other regions as well. So this is the disadvantages, and they are really a marginalized and disadvantaged group. And within this sector, you have the women small food producers, further marginalized and further disadvantaged. And so they have very little options for developing new and adequate sources of livelihoods. So in addition to gender discrimination and disparity, rural women also experience the social and economic exclusion, as I mentioned to you, because of ethnicity, age, disability, nationality, caste, religion, or sexual orientation. So on top of being women, they're also discriminated as and because of their social class. Next slide, please. So you can see the discrimination and disparity makes women vulnerable. So they have that is socially, politically, and economically. And for example, if you look at the issue of secure tenure or access to land, you find that almost 58% of economically active women in Asia Pacific work in the agricultural sector, but less than 20% hold secure tenure of the lands. They farm and face impediments such as the lack of access to credit, infrastructure, irrigation, and machinery. So other examples that contribute to women's vulnerability are and include lack of access to education, employment, equality, and political representation. Next slide, please. So the, uh, yeah, no, one up. Yeah. So this discrimination actually begins from the home, and it permeates all levels, including community, national levels, where discriminatory laws and practices keep women from fully participating in political and economic life. So women face multiple burdens. And what does this mean? Because, you know, when even in Malaysia now, we're supposed to be in the 21st century. And even when children go to school and they fill up a form, who is the head of the household? Who is the head? And it's always the men. If it's single parents, then it's a bit different, but it's always the men. And when children, and I remember, when children were asked, why can't my mother be, the head of the family? And she's the one that's looking after us. So, and they are told to keep quiet. They're told that this is not true. The father is the head of the household. I mean, it's just at that level of discrimination. Very simple. And that is how mindsets are created. The other is when you go for loans, and uh, it's always because you don't have, as women, you don't have tangible property or land. You can't take a loan to improve your land, or to do some smallholder farming there, or to improve your farming, buy new implements, machinery, etc. It's impossible. And so you have to kind of go and see that at all the levels where women are discriminated. And I'll come back to also agricultural workers, where the situation is even worse. So so when it comes to agricultural workers, they overall, even now in the plantation sector, or in the agricultural workers, when they work in small farmers, households, and sorry, farms, as workers, they get lower wages compared to the men, and they face also insecure conditions. And in the plantations, you also have the situation where the sexual harassment, and and even situations of real difficulties working in big plantations, where you start, uh, it's so broad that and it's so wide that you get lost, and sometimes not lost in that sense, but sexual harassment becomes a reality in terms of the work. And of course, lack of access to social services. So, and I'll give an example later on, a bit further, discussing these issues. So as agricultural producers, women work harder and longer without recognition of their contribution, and without remuneration, even in their family farms. So they have the triple burden of being one, working at home, domestic, looking after the reproductive work, in terms of looking after children, or older people, senior citizens, their grandmothers, etc., and mothers, or mother-in-laws or father-in-laws. And the second one is productive, where you actually work the farm. And third is community work, because women also do a lot of the sharing in terms of community work, that includes, it could be community marriages, or discussions, and women are involved, but always often sitting in the back, and rarely in the front seats. Moving on, next. Yeah. Okay. So as I said, all the reproductive work, getting water, fuel, food preparation, and in many countries, and we're seeing this in Vietnam, we're seeing this in Cambodia, and we're seeing it in parts of Indonesia, where the outmigration of men and young people, even the young women, are being what do you call, are leaving for the cities or outside the country as migrant workers. And this leaves a lot of women in the rural areas providing the main labor for their own farms as wage workers. And sometimes if they're in the cities, the men come back, and after the harvest, after all the work is done, and make the decision on how the money is going to be spent. And so we're seeing this in the documentation that we have, that this is happening, and women are realizing also that seems to be a bit of a lack of, equality and lack of justice. In fact, for all the work that they have done, they have no decision making power. As farmers and workers, women spray pesticides and are exposed to these agrochemicals. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is an example, and we've done a lot of documentation looking at women workers in Indonesia and Malaysia working in the oil palm plantations as pesticide sprayers. And they're exposed to pesticide, including paraquat, glyphosate, glufosinate, and I was also seeing that they were also exposed to chlorothalonil, which is likely carcinogen under the US EPA. But so they use this, and they use this every day almost. Some of the contract farming, so they are contract and casual workers, so they go there daily for a few hours, and they have a certain area that they have to cover, and they carry heavy tanks of pesticides for many hours on their back. And this causes also considerable strain on top of spraying pesticides, but also the occupational poisoning that they are exposed to. Sometimes their spray cans are leaking, and the spillage, as well as even if it's okay, they are directly spraying, and they're being exposed. Previously, actually, we were able to document the plantation workers spraying on the oil palm fruits, and they have this long pole, and they were spraying, and half of it was falling on their heads. So that kind of exposure, and it's such a, like, it's a private property, so you can't really go in and really see what's happening. So a lot of it was done through testimonies of the women, surveys with the women, and worst part is that they rarely use PPE, hardly. When we ask them, do you use PPE? Yes, yes, we use gloves, and it's cotton gloves, which is even worse. Some of them buy their own boots, and they use a handkerchief or scarf around their face, and that's still going on. And we started documenting this maybe 20 years ago, and it's happening even now in the rural areas of Indonesia, in Kalimantan. In fact, they've even gone to Papua New Guinea and Africa, Liberia. It's also quite bad. And so what is the problem with the PPE is that it is unavailable, often unavailable, or they have to purchase it themselves, or it is, and most of them say it's very uncomfortable due to the hot, humid climate. And they spray pesticides almost 5 hours a day, and that's impossible for them to keep on having this PPE. It's they get heat stroke and heat exhaustion. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is the 20 minutes. But before we go into the 20 minutes discussion, I also wanted to say that one of the things that we were actually shocked to get testimonies from the plantation workers, that they don't, their health impacts, even their signs and symptoms of pesticide poisoning, when they talk to the hospital assistant, it's never taken seriously. They are given paracetamol, and that's it. Then they also they get leave if they have period pains. So, but they have to prove that they have period. So they have to go and open their underwear to show that, yes, we have period. So nobody wants to do that. And so they work, through this pain. And it's so bad because they are not organized, or they're not allowed to be organized. They're not allowed to voice their issues. Even if they have a trade union that's so-called represents them, it's all the men who are the leaders, and so they don't get a chance, even though they have tried to stand for elections, and but there's no basically support. So I'll stop here for us to have further discussions.
Thank you very much, Saro, for taking us through quite a complex discussion and setting the stage for us to be able to discuss the first question. So we'll move into the chat room now. The first question is, in the countries where you work or where you're from, what are your experiences with women and men smallholder farmers and workers' exposures to pesticides and their impacts? And you can give some examples of your experiences on disparity and vulnerability of men and women, farmers and workers when being exposed to pesticides. So we'll go into the chat room. We will give a 5-minute warning when we're going to move on to the next one, and there will be a poll question as well. See you in the chat room. And if you haven't introduced yourself, please do, with your name, organization, and country. You'll notice that a poll question has now been posted. If you would like to respond to it, you can click on the link to menti.com in the chat, and it'll take you straight to it, and you can enter your answer, or you can always go to menti.com and put in the code on the screen. welcome if you're just joining us. We are in the chat room discussing the first question about your experiences with women and men smallholder farmers and workers' exposures to pesticides and their impacts. And we're also responding to the poll on the screen, which you can go to by going to menti.com and putting in the code, or you can click on the link in the chat room. You'll note there's a second poll that's been put on the screen. So again, you can go to the Menti link in the chat room, and you're being asked to list examples of gender discrimination in food and agricultural production in relation to pesticide use. And if you can just put your country name, even if you think there is none. Thank you. Sarah, I know there's been quite a lot of discussion going on. If you would like to just make a few comments of what you've seen in the polls or in the discussion. I know there's been a lot. I haven't been able to keep up with it all. If you want to make a few comments before we move on to question 2, you're welcome.
Great. Thank you so much. Yes, I just wanted to maybe emphasize the issue of the personal protective equipment, because we are seeing that everywhere. I mean, if you just go to rural areas in Africa, Latin America, or Asia, there's lack of PPE, and one of the major problems is that it's really uncomfortable due to the hot, humid climates. It's also expensive. It's sometimes unavailable in rural areas. But the issue, it's very clear with the International Code of Conduct on Pesticide Management. I just wanted to read that part, where basically it says government and industry should cooperate in further reducing risk by promoting the use of personal protective equipment which is suitable for the task to be carried out, appropriate to the prevailing climatic conditions, and affordable. And it goes on to say that pesticides, this is 3.6, Article 3.6, pesticides requiring the use of personal protective equipment that is uncomfortable, expensive, or not readily available should be avoided, especially in the case of small-scale farmers and small-scale users and farm workers in hot climates. And I think it's very, very, very true. And so the third question, I hope that we can look at other methods of pest management, and that is something we should be exploring as well. So that's one point. I see that a lot of people are saying that, PP is not available, nobody's using it. Second, I also wanted to relate to the issue where some of the participants are saying that they don't see pesticide spray by women in some countries, and I think that is sometimes that's why you need to have the next issue will come up where you talk about gender disaggregated data, as well as gender analysis of the use of pesticides, because then you will realize that sometimes there is a kind of invisibility, and so it's better to understand better what's happening on the ground by doing this gender analysis with the women and the farmers on the ground, men and women farmers on the ground. And then third, I just wanted to highlight what my colleague from Pan Germany mentioned, a study that was a peer-reviewed study that was released last in 2020, late 2020, on acute pesticide poisoning, unintentional. And this is a peer-reviewed study that was published in BMC Public Health, which shows 385 million cases annually of acute unintentional pesticide poisoning. So I just wanted to highlight what was in that chat box. That's it,
Great.
Andrea.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah, for those comments. So we'll go on to question 2. We are
Yeah.
a little bit behind, just 5 minutes or so, but that's okay. So on to
Okay.
question 2.
Thanks. Okay, the question 2, I just wanted to highlight the issue of that I mentioned, that to address gender inequality and disparity, we need to understand the underlying social, political, and economic landscape that keep women and girl children disempowered. So gender analysis helps to provide information about the division of labor, roles and responsibilities, access to and control over resources. As we were saying, no, that so few women, even though they work, they do the bulk of farm work, don't own the land that they work on, or they don't have they lack access to these land and resources, and they are also in terms of the understanding of the gender relative condition and position in society. So a gender analysis helps to understand who, how, and how the use of pesticide in food and fiber production affects men and women. And sometimes, you need to also look at who makes the decision on pesticide purchase. Is it the women? In Vietnam, they say it's the women, whereas in other places, it's the man who buys it from the stores and bring it back to the farms. And who sprays the pesticide? And I think it's interesting to find out who actually will be the pesticide sprayers, even if they're not pesticide sprayers, as we saw in the chat. This There's also they're also mixing, as South Africa, someone from South Africa mentioned that they do the mixing, which is even more dangerous because you're dealing with concentrated products. Then PPE available, affordable, comfortable? If they are poison, are there nearby medical facilities to treat them? Who has to bear the cost of pesticide poisoning? And just as an example, in 2017, during 2018, there was this massive pesticide poisoning that took place in Yavatmal in India, Maharashtra. And more than 100 people were poisoned. They had to be rushed to the hospital. And some died, and one of the pesticides that was implicated was diphenthioron and monocrotophos, and and um, and diphenthrione is a Syngenta product, and it's polo. But anyway, so what happened was the family had to just bear the cost. The government tried to provide some support. The hospitals did try to, but in the end, it was the farmer and the workers had to bear the brunt of the pesticide poisoning. So who is making the profits, and where is the who is bearing the cost of being poisoned? So I think, and then of course the environmental impacts. The other, just to add, is sometimes men spray the pesticides, but in floriculture, as someone was mentioning in the Menti meter, the discussion, that it's also when once they're sprayed, the women go in, the girl children, even the small boys, go in to pluck the flowers. Sometimes it's jasmine, sometimes it's the big cut flowers, and they're exposed. So to try to understand this from bias, gender-based analysis, I think is very, very important. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is the question, 20 minutes to discuss these two questions in terms of, how do you consider the different vulnerabilities of women and men in terms of pesticide use, exposure, and impacts, and give examples of how gender analysis is conducted in your country on the use and impact of pesticides on health of the farmers and workers.
Great. Thanks, Saro. And thanks for that introduction to question 2. Again, we'll be in the chat room discussing. If you haven't introduced yourself and you've joined us recently, please do, with your name, organization, and country. And again, there'll be some polls posted on Menti. See you in the chat room. see there's another poll question that's been posted. The Menti link is in the chat room. If you want to click on that and go straight to menti.com. Otherwise, you can go to menti.com and put in the code on the screen. The question is, has a gender analysis on gender and pesticides use been conducted in your country? You can state the country and then yes, no, don't know. Thank you. Although many of you had said in the previous poll that gender analysis was not being conducted in your country, perhaps you could still give examples of how gender analysis results should or could be used. Welcome if you've just joined us. We are discussing question 2 in the chat room about gender data analysis, and we are addressing the poll on the screen, which you can go to by going to menti.com and putting in the code number. If you've not introduced yourself yet, please do with your name, organization, and country. Thanks. So Sarah, as we wind up with question 2, would you like to make any comments on what you've seen, both in the poll and in the chat room? You're welcome to come on and make any comments you might have.
Thanks, Andrea. Yes, I just wanted to say that it would really be good to do a gender analysis survey or review, or study. I know things are difficult. Sometimes it's also funding, but this would really kind of also focus on what's the real problem on the ground, and that's something that we've been doing quite systematically. And now we are starting a new project in 4 countries, and we're doing what we call Sika and gender baseline survey. And it's really one is to understand, what kind of pesticide use is happening on the ground. If highly hazardous pesticides are being used, are women. So we decided that at least 50%, if there are more, it's fine. At least 50% of the respondents should be women. And so when we compile the information, then it becomes very clear what kind of intervention is is important, and where should our focus be, what would be our overall um, focus areas, objectives, etc. So that's something that we try to do that very systematically, because then we know, in 3 years or 4 years, there is a change, because we've done this analysis, and focus the project to meet those needs and meet those things. Now, when we do incorporated into this is what we call the community pesticide action monitoring. So trying to understand the pesticide use in the communities, but also in terms of the social and economic, the income, the social aspects, and for gender, in terms of decision making, as well as how much of decision making are they allowed, how much are they in terms of their roles, and what kind of is it productive work, reproductive work, or community work. So trying to understand the roles and work of women in the different communities. And one of the things that was quite interesting when we were discussing whether we should add the whole issue of domestic violence. And so there was questions about, do we add alcohol consumption of, whether it's men or women, just to understand what's happening on the ground, because, we see sometimes the use of alcohol leads to domestic violence, and, will that be useful? So all that is part of a discussion, because we also want to look at home, what's happening in terms of the domestic violence, and in work, the sexual harassment. Is there Do they have the ability to organize, and women, are they able to, first, whether women workers, agricultural workers, are able to organize, and whether women workers can organize. So those are some of the dimensions of understanding when we do the gender analysis, so that the focus and the objectives can be much better, and fits the what's needed on the ground, and what's the need, what's the intervention that is required to help them to move forward in terms of their meeting their needs. So those are some of the discussion points in terms of gender analysis. So yeah, so that's, so it's interesting what I'm seeing, that some are doing this, but it's also kind of difficult. Andre, shall I
Great.
move on to
Thanks.
question 3?
Yeah, please do, Sarah. That would be great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So question 3 was to look at, because as farmers and workers, women, as well as men, also have tremendous knowledge and skills in agriculture and for agroecology, including increasing biodiversity, building soils, and creating new relationships with consumers. And these are well documented. And one of the things that we are seeing is that, in a community that we worked in together with a local partner, we call Pani Federation of Women. They started off actually being very concerned by doing a community monitoring on the situation of pesticide use, and since their members were all women, so it was focused on women, and they were a bit shocked when they found that they the women were being exposed to pesticides. They were spraying pesticides, and highly hazardous ones at that time. So one of the things they decided to do kind of a short survey study, and did a lot of campaigns, and petitions to the government to ban at the time paraquat and some of the highly hazardous pesticides. um, and they were, and then they said, well, while this is good, while we are doing this, we need to also now move with the women away from pesticide use. And so they started to invite other farmers who were doing organic farming or agroecology, or low input agriculture. And so they started to have become motivated to have their own training courses, or travel in small vans to neighboring districts to see what's happening in terms of the agroecology. And so after 3 decades, actually, now when we go to the farms of the Vikalpani members, we are seeing that they're moving. They are so excited about sharing with us their agroecological practices and they have a small weekly market that they sell those vegetables and their home garden products, their rice production. So it's amazing that they were able to organize around. They started with being concerned about pesticides, and now they have a healthy community. And it was like of course, this was before the pandemic. So when I was there, it was like a big community event. No, every weekend it's like a community event. So there was also all this relationship building that was happening at the community level that it's not tangible in terms of benefits, but you can feel the benefits when people feel healthy and happy and are part of a community that is working together. Anyway, just as an example, and I also then want to ask and basically say that with this and all some of the examples and experiences from the ground with working with women, we are seeing that it is very, very clear in terms of um, the evidence that um, women with improved knowledge, skills, and capacity can assert their rights for equality. So this means that empowered women have improved capacity and leadership roles to advocate and assert their equal rights and to develop their full potential and be free from violence and discrimination. And this is very clear if you look at the resource that I shared with you in terms, if you look at the FAO, I think it was one of the state of agriculture that focused on women some time ago. I think it was a few years ago. And this is actually coming from their experiences also, that once they are empowered and they have improved capacity, they are able to produce and increase their production almost by 30 to 50%. um, and that's amazing. So further, because they are also exposed to environmental degradation, because they see the loss of biodiversity, the lack of livelihood potential as rural women, they can actually be very strong advocates of agroecology, which provides the best option for a more sustainable agriculture. And if it takes a lot of time. One of our experience that it takes a lot of time for women to actually to be organized and to be and to have take on leadership. But once they are convinced, they are able to uh, because for them it's not just the benefits to themselves, but to their family, to their children, grandchildren, and all their community members. So they are very committed. So I just wanted to emphasize the need to look at alternatives to highly hazardous pesticides and pesticides, because pesticides are poisons anyway. So moving on to the next question. So in your country, how have the alternatives to pesticides been considered based on women and men farmers' pesticide use knowledge?
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah, for taking us through the third and final question. We will continue discussing it now for the next about 20 minutes, and there'll be some poll questions as well. Again, there's another poll question on the screen, which you can go to by clicking on the Menti link in the chat room, or you can continue if you've already been in Menti by clicking on next question, or you can go to menti.com and put in the code on the screen. So has a pesticide ever been banned or withdrawn or restricted in your country based on cultural, gendered practices? And do continue answering question 3. In your country, how have the alternatives to pesticides been considered, or have they been considered based on men and women's pesticide use knowledge? You'll see that we have the next poll for this question. Should pesticide regulators take into account gendered practices when registering and regulating pesticides? Of course, the issue again is actually having access to data. Sarah, I don't know if you want to make some comments on what you're seeing at the moment, both in terms of what's been appearing in the polls as well as in the chat.
Yeah,
Yeah,
actually,
I think one of the problems is this access to good studies and data. And I realized I had a quick look, and there are some studies, but I don't know if they're good or not. So perhaps, people could be encouraged to share some studies. That would be really
mm.
helpful.
That'll be great, Andrea. I was really taken quite happy actually to see the last poll answer, which said most people, in fact, everyone who responded to the poll said yes, they would consider taking into account gendered practices when registering and regulating pesticides. So that's the good thing. If they had the data, I think, as you said, Andrea, that's one of the challenges that we are facing. And it's also, looking at some of the responses in the chat that, it's not a question of how understanding the pesticide use of men and women, but that people are just because of health and environmental reasons. And I think one of the things that maybe there's a connection which we are not seeing because there's no real solid data, or that there is a link, because when farmers and workers are exposed, and if they had an opportunity to be available, if there's a capacity building and training, and is available in terms of IPM or organic or agroecology practices, I think because they are seeing the health impacts, they're seeing the effects on the environment, the biodiversity, there's a tendency to actually move towards alternatives to pesticides, and also the cost. If they can, if it's a low input, is possible, low input, for in terms of agriculture and farming, then it also lowers their cost. And so it's economic, it's also, as I mentioned, it's also social, because you have this community practices. So I see that a lot of the answers are quite good in terms of seeing that there is some change happening on the ground. But what would be interesting is to see the linkages of how men and women and farmers and workers actually see and the impacts of pesticides on them and the community and the environment. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for that. So we do have a little bit of time left, and I wonder if anyone would like to unmute themselves and make a comment if they haven't had a chance to. Does anyone want to make a comment or say anything in terms of what you've learned today, how perhaps you will apply your knowledge in terms of what you've gained today differently? You can just unmute yourself if you'd like to make a comment. I think for me, the big issue really is, how do we improve this data collection? How do we improve on collecting data in order to inform regulators? I know there is quite a move in terms of the chemicals platform and the chemicals discussion, trying to bring gender in, trying to have indicators. But how can we actually improve in terms of collecting the data, and specifically for pesticides? We'll just carry on a bit more in the chat room, and I will conclude shortly.
Oh, hi, this is Olga Snarska from Health Environment Justice Support. I just wanted to say thank you so much to Sarah and for Andrea for organizing this. And I believe that gathering gender desegregated data for the work in developing and transition countries is extremely important. For example, in Eastern European countries and Central Asian countries, this data is completely absent. And so we know the situation that in some Central Asian countries, women go to, for example, pick up cotton just a few days after these fields were sprayed with pesticides. And also pregnant women may be in the field as well. So collecting data, desegregated information is really extremely important, as well as raising awareness about among the most vulnerable groups like women and girls about the impact of pesticides on their health and how they should stand for their rights and actually do not go into the fields when the pesticides has just been sprayed on. So this kind of work is very important. And so thank you very much for raising these issues.
Thank you, Olga, and thanks for sharing your thoughts. Yeah, I think we have a real challenge on how to improve this aggregated data. If anyone has an opportunity to read the book Invisible Women, they talk about the complexity of disaggregated gendered data, and also how many of our decisions and legislation and laws are made on data where it's assumed that men and women are the same. And I think from today's discussion, it's quite clear that there are gendered exposure risks, both for men and women, and that legislation really needs to take that into account. The challenge is, how do we collect that? Would anyone else like to make a comment? I've also posted a study and wondered if anyone has read it and reviewed it. It would be interesting to know if it's of any use. You can let us know. I see that you've unmuted yourself. Is it Ranjini? Do you want to make a comment? Sarah, would you like to make any more comments before we close today's discussion?
Yeah, just to thank you, Andrea and UCT, and for organizing this, and I hope that this would this discussion will continue, because I think that this is one of key elements and key aspects of how women and men, the differences in terms of how they're exposed, and how they organize, how they are empowered to take action against these pesticides, either through campaigning or through looking for alternatives. I think that's a very important aspect of moving us to moving away from the kind of impacts that we are seeing in terms of acute pesticide poisoning, 385 million a year, as well as chronic effects, which is more difficult to document, but linking up with the studies that are already in place, and of course all the international conventions and guidelines and GMPM and all that actually is providing the push for a better way of doing agriculture and food production that is more sustainable and more environmentally friendly. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sarah, for that and for those concluding thoughts. And just to say thank you for taking the time, to really work us through this important topic, taking time out of your schedule and also your experience. We often have quite a lot on Africa, so it was nice to have Asian Pacific viewpoints. So thank you very much for that. Just a reminder to everyone that these communities of practice that we have, this pesticide discussion forum, is not a webinar. It's really an opportunity for us to discuss a topic. So I'd like to thank all of you for your time and for your responses, for making this an engaging discussion. I'd like to also thank Tatum in the background, who was organizing the efficiency of our slides and our polls, and also to thank Camille for their support for this discussion forum. If you haven't signed up for the discussion forum, the link is now in the chat, so that you can sign up and you will receive notifications of our next one, which will be in 2 weeks' time. We also have a Pesticide Weekly newsletter that comes out every week with research information, different themes, training opportunities, so please do sign up for that as well. In a few weeks' time, we'll have a digest that comes out from this discussion, which will be sent to all of you, and Tatum will post where you can find the slides for this discussion if you'd like. So thank you all again very much for your time. Please do take a moment to fill in our evaluation. We value your inputs and also what else you would like to see from this discussion. As you can see, the next discussion is on the 17th of June. having rights-based approach to pesticides management, which Ulle Johansson from Kemi will be leading. And I hope you'll join us then. Thank you very much. Stay safe and have a good day further. Bye for now.
Bye. Bye, everyone.